All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Rahin. Very happy to be here. Um, Today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about not the specific details of, how we go and optimize different algorithms or solve specific little problems. I think these are areas where, first of all, I'm sure there's much smarter people in the room to give you better tutorials. Secondly, it's information that's readily available. What I wanted to share with you instead are some of the thoughts that we are involved in at Zalando as we work on many related issues to data and to scaling. So this is really, I'm sharing some of my findings and some of the lessons I've learned from the trenches, if you will. Okay, so first of all, about Zalando, I'll be brief. As you know, we're a fashion platform. We're the largest in Europe. It's an amazing story in terms of a startup that was founded in 2008, really grew faster than anybody could keep up with. We went public in 2014, and today we're the largest provider of fashion and trends in Europe. Some numbers to kind of put things a bit in perspective. So we currently have presence in 15 countries. We have 4 fulfillment centers, and we just announced a couple of days ago that we will have a new one in Sweden. Perfect timing for this talk, right? And then you can read the rest. Over or about 20 million active customers. We just announced a guidance on revenue for 2016 of about 3.6 billion. Big number of products and over 14,000 employees. And this is an area where we're actually growing really fast as well. These are some of our main sites. A lot of our R&D happens in Berlin. We have, I believe, about 8 or 9 different buildings. So we have quite a big presence in Berlin, which is an amazingly fun city to live in, by the way. But that's a whole other discussion. I invite you to visit, really, if you haven't already. We do have also R&D sites in Dortmund, in Dublin, and in Helsinki. These are R&D sites focused on very specific technical area. Like we have areas where we focus on search, on data sciences, machine learning. We try to provide an environment where colleagues of the same area of specialty can build synergies, work together, and learn from each other. Lastly, I believe today we have about 1,500 techies. If you're interested to learn more, check out our website. Okay, so today's agenda, right? So this is maybe a good point in time to give you some context about myself. I'm an engineer. Many years ago. Started my career in design, hardware and software projects, and really ever since I started my career, I've been knee-deep, sometimes neck-deep in data. Was a math major as well, so this is something that I really like to be involved in. You fast forward 20 plus years after having learned a lot at places like Microsoft and Amazon and Intel, and a few startups along the way. My task at Zalando is to understand what is the value of data, what is the data we have, and how can we help the company scale and have velocity. As you saw those numbers, we're not a toddler or a baby anymore. Perhaps you can say we're a teenager, so we need to start getting a bit serious. I know it's a scary word, but the point is we're at a stage where if we want to sustain our growth, we need to have some structure and some discipline in place, and the way to do that is data. So I want to share with you several thoughts here. First of all, how do we think about this problem? Obviously, Zalando is not the only company going through this transition. There's a lot of books out there about the topic of scaling. I just wanted to share you our experience at Zalando. So we'll start high level. I also want to show you what does it look like when I say scaling with data, organizing, building teams. At a high level, I want to make that a little bit more concrete for you. And then first and foremost, I think the one area you see repeated throughout this talk is mindset and culture. Because how we do it is not really having the best algorithm or the best ideas or even the best people, actually, believe it or not. All these things add value if the right mindset is there. And that is, across the company, I would say, our #1 priority. Because, Zalando, everything's relative. Zalando is already a very data-driven company. It's absolutely amazing. Even, for a guy who came from a place like Amazon. However, there's also a lot of areas where we can take it to the next level. So we do this through focusing on the mindset, focusing on workflows, and tools and processes. This is something that's a little bit of a tangent, but I just wanted to share with you some of the things that you may find interesting. Some of the things I talk about, I think about randomly here and there. It's about really the impact of data in our lives, even beyond fashion, even beyond Zalando, really at a global level. I also think these are areas that are going to produce quite a bit of value and quite a bit of disruption in the future. So first of all, and I'll be very quick about this, but I want you to at least put this in the context of the rest of the things I'm talking about. So data extraction and analysis. So obviously, we all know what big data is, perhaps. I don't know. Everybody thinks of it differently. Here, where I'm going with this is that, the scale and the size and the complexity of data is exponentially growing. There's a saying that, forgive me, it escapes me a little bit, but it's something like, a billion years ago, maybe humanity and life reached a point. Billion minutes ago is when, Christianity started. But a billion Google searches ago was literally probably a few minutes ago. So we're on this accelerated curve that it's really not going to slow down. And if you really want to understand what's going on and apply it to your line of business, you really need new methodologies and new technologies. So I'll talk about storage, which is one very key area for us. Methodologies also are important because, that is things like machine learning, for instance, data analysis, data extraction. So these are overarching challenges that I think all organizations have, and we're also addressing it at Zalando. Personalization and customization, this is an interesting one. So, today, we kind of take it for granted, right? You search for something, pizza, you expect your smartphone to show you pizza around you, right? You take it for granted. But if you really look at it, for some people, it's actually uncomfortable, right? Because there is a bit of a maybe implicit exchange going on here, right? For instance, you want to get a loan, right? You give information to your banker. Several years of taxes, your paycheck, your entire financial existence, right? That's kind of scary to me personally. But I know, geez, I have to do it if I want to get a loan, right? Same with your doctor. You tell him everything to get medical advice. Well, personalization and customization is the same challenge. And I think this is an area, this is just my opinion, where there are some frictions in place for the right reason. One example is one of our products that handles customer data. We have a very interesting legal challenge in Germany, which is we cannot mix, for instance, navigational customer data, meaning what they do before and on the site. We cannot mix that with transactional data, meaning things they've bought, things they've liked, things they've returned, all of that. So, I don't have a good reason to explain to you why, but obviously, this comes from the concern of protecting privacy and governance, and moving forward is going to be, I think, a bigger and bigger problem. Continuous experiments, I think this is also very important. So I would say, the core of this problem is differentiating between correlation and causation, if you will, right? They're not the same thing. For instance, what's a good example in this room, for instance? Let's assume, all of you guys are data scientists on the first row, and you're sitting on blue chairs, right? Great. But sitting on blue chairs doesn't make you a data scientist, right? So there's a lot of these situations at work where we're analyzing data and there's a source of confusion at that level. What is the answer? Experimentation. So this is an area where I think all of us need to be very disciplined, knowledgeable, and we have to have the right tools and methodologies in place to kind of have it under our skin, right? This is part of how we do work. The last one I say, new kind of contracts due to better monitoring. So this one is big, actually. This one means that today, for instance, there is a computer somewhere in every single transaction, okay? A cash register is a computer. A data center also is a computer, technically, right? So what that means is we've kind of decoupled the transaction between the two ends, and we've enabled really low-level engagement. So for instance, you're seeing now car-sharing programs, right, where a car has been divided to very, very, very small increments of use, and you list directly only what you need, right? I would also say, if you really think about cloud computing, that's also, in a sense, similar trend, and there's going to be more. So where is this going to go? I don't know, but one kind of a fun way to predict the future is to maybe think of it this way. Whatever rich people have today, the average people are going to want it, say, in 5 years, and the poor people are going to want it in 10 years. And that's actually accelerating as well. Example, driverless cars, right? People have chauffeurs. Now you can go get a driverless car. Some of us, cost is going to go down. Eventually, everybody may have access to it. That's another example. That's, I think you get the idea. So this is important in terms of how we run and monitor our businesses as well. These are really the 4 areas, I think, overarching. As you think through how you want to build products, these are some of the angles that we consider. So let's bring it down to the level of Zalando, right? What is our data philosophy? As I mentioned earlier, we want to enable a platform that can scale and innovate at high velocity. It's all about speed. Remember the Neanderthal to Christianity to Google search analogy. It's all about velocity. You need to have a platform that allows you to innovate fast, experiment, see what's working and what's not, iterate, double down on what works, get rid of what doesn't. It's really the only way to work, and it's not going to get any easier moving forward. So we want to enable that. That's the first point. Where do we start? Well, there's many ways of looking at a product, define it, prioritize it, develop visions for it. We believe everything starts and ends with customers. When we initially start talking about a new product or a new feature, there's some very specific things that are required. Who's the customer? What's the value to the customer? How do you measure success? You think they're easy questions, but if you sit down and you really want to give a precise answer, well thought through, based on data, they're not easy. But once you do it, the rest of the strategy almost writes itself. And then at the other end, of course, you have to have success criteria, the instrumentation, and the tooling to measure it, and then iterate. Where does data come in? Well, data, plain and simple, is the voice of customers, right? Is fundamental. Zalando is actually a very fun company because we have different parts of the company that bring in very different points of view and perspectives and skills. For instance, in one building we have techies, in the other building we have model shooting, people just kind of making sure they look good. We have in another building, let's say, buyers, merchandisers, people who deal with big brands, so on and so forth, right? So, take an example where we have a big campaign coming with Adidas or Nike, pick your favorite brand. Most of the customers, so obviously our branding group has a very strong opinion. These are some of the things we need to prioritize based on hitting this customer, which is great. That's essentially what made Zalando successful over the last years. But we want to complement that as well with data-driven understanding, because here we have the voice of a customer over several million. And this voice also, it's our job as a data organization to make sure it is surfaced properly with the right insights, with the right messages, so we can run the company, not just based on 1 or 2 or 3 opinions, but based on the market, based on a large and precise understanding of the market. So this is all grand. How do you do it, right, in a big company? Well, look at where we are today. Well, you can't look, but when I look at where we are today, again, we're in a phase of growing up. We have a tremendous amount of talent, a lot of projects coming in. They may or may not always be ideally coordinated, right? I think this is a problem many companies have, big and small. Really, the process is always behind the innovation and the product. So what we're trying to do here is have methodologies based on end-to-end view of a given flow. For instance, data, I'll show you in a minute what it looks like, right? Data starts for us, and every company is different, starts for us at the very bottom where we have a data infrastructure that we use for storage, for processing, for making data available across the company. And there's hundreds of different microservices that take the data, do something with it, whether it's a signal that they can use in a product, or sometimes it's a set of enrichments, modifications to the data that then gets pushed back so other services can use, right? So it's a very complex picture. How do we have these people work together, right? Different departments, different goals, so on and so forth. So one fundamental way we are using is have an end-to-end view. What does that mean for data? You go from the actual creation and storage of data at an infrastructure level. One level of abstraction above, we have data platforms focused on specific areas. I talked about customer data, but we also have, of course, product data. We have different understanding of various influencers around the web where we create insights. For instance, imagine if you monitor the fashion world, one part of it is several hundred influencers, fashion bloggers, fashion news, people who influence the fashion industry. So, when we track that, occasionally we have some surprising insights, right? You may see that, geez, for some reason over the last 2 weeks, everybody is talking about red shirts, okay? So what's going on with red shirts, right? We don't know. If we don't do this, we're not going to know. We're never going to know. So then what do you do with this information? Well, you have to surface it. You have to make it actionable. You have to add more insights. So that's the enrichment part. But then all this intelligence I'm talking about is completely worthless if you don't have a good ability to surface it to your customers, right? And how do we surface it to customers? This is where it branches, right? One is for external customers, obviously, fields such as search recommendations, personalization, and we also look at some emerging technologies, things like bots and some other crazy things. Sizing technology. If you guys have some good technical ideas about that one, come talk to me, please. And of course, internally BI, right? In parallel, the way we organize the business, these are the culture components, right? Talking about making this a natural way of how we work. We also have a product analytics team that is essentially the evangelist for data-driven thinking, methodologies, but also providing the tools, right? You can't really go and say, hey, be data-driven. Okay, if I don't know what it is, I can't do it. If I know what it is, but I don't have the right tools to do it, I still can't do it. So it's a two-sided approach. First, understanding what the KPIs are, what the metrics are, how do we measure them, how do we experiment, and how do we actually track where the rubber hits the road, essentially, which is with our customers. So let's go even one level lower. Day-to-day, what does it look like? So we have small autonomous teams at Zalando. And different groups are different. However, there is a common model, I would say a typical model, which includes a collaboration in a small focused team with a product owner who sets the strategy and the vision for the product, defines essentially the why we're doing this. And that's where data-driven prioritization and thinking comes in. If you make a case, make sure you have the data to back it up. Because doing a feature for us, doing a product is not a right. It's actually a privilege, right? You get access to company resources. You have to be very clear on why are we doing it, what's the impact. Otherwise, we're not going to let you do it, right? It's very simple. So this is in itself a big cultural shift because, some parts of the company and some parts of many companies are very much engineering driven. And engineers are, some of the smartest people. they're in the room, you know, they want to do, they want to build, they don't really know if it's going to be used necessarily, who's going to use it, why, but it's like building Legos, right? I'm sure all of you have built Legos. You sit in front of a bucket and you just can't stop. And the better Lego builder you are, the craziest thing you're going to build, right? So what did I just build? Well, I mean, I don't know. It started like an airplane, but then I thought, you know, if I add this thing here, it could look like a futuristic castle, on and on, right? You see my point. So it's very important for product development to work together very closely. And we take it one step further. Is not something we add to how we work, it is actually a big part of how we work, meaning when we do even resource planning, topics such as experimentation, testing, and validation are part of the planning. It's part of how we work. It is not something down the road where the schedule is late, you're going to do trade-offs against it. No, it's not an option. It's part of how we ship products. So these are all little changes, but as you can see, I hope you can see a picture emerges where we're kind of taking our execution in a simple, agile, high velocity type of a thinking that frees people from all the work that we don't want to do. Things like setting up systems, figuring out what you do, some basic methodology and framework that really frees your creativity. That's a side effect, and it is amazing when you see it at work. So KPIs, we talked about it. That's a fundamental thing. One of the first things I did when I joined Zalando, I worked with my colleagues and basically rethought our KPIs, right? KPIs are how you measure various things. And, you know, there's business KPIs, there are specific product KPIs, and there needs to be a framework that allows you to understand the implications, understand how you can steer it. And it's a big topic, but this is, quite frankly, perhaps the first step. You know, as a leader in the data field, you gotta have a very good idea of what you're measuring and why it's important. And then lastly, you know, we don't want to build products that nobody uses. So we are very firm believers in using MVPs and using iteration. So this is like a little funny cartoon that I think expresses this point really well, better than I could say in words. We all have tendencies to kind of have a vision, obviously, right? Everything starts with a vision, and then boom, you want to go execute the vision, right? You have a vision for a car, that's the first approach. But that's not how we do it, right? It's not about the car, right? It's not about the car. It's about transportation. You want to go from point A to point B. So we're like, well, you know, what do you need? Wheels. You know, we build a skateboard, you make it better, you iterate, and then you have a Porsche at the end. Or a Volvo, sorry, a Volvo at the end. Okay, and then since I'm running out of time, looks like I just wanted to leave you with a couple of suggestions. One is a small book that I really like. I've made this book a required reading in my org. It's a very small book. It's written for product managers, but it's written for product managers with a very high emphasis on technology. So I think we've used, and as you can see, you know, the writer worked at Google and Amazon. I haven't worked at Google, but I can tell you it's a very nice summary of Amazon's technologies and methodologies and what the impact is. So I think, you know, make this a baseline for operational excellence across your org. You're not going to regret it. And then if you want to go crazy, there's one topic you can read up on, which is this topic of econometrics. It goes back to what I was telling you about causation versus correlation. you know, as big as these buzzwords got so quickly, you know, big data, machine learning, AI, perhaps this is the next big thing. So, you know, read up on it, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for your time.
So we have time for a couple of questions. Anyone have any questions? Over here.
Thank you. I just didn't get the point very well about your continuous experiments, how you do it end-to-end, these kinds of things in continuous experiment in your company. What is your culture?
Yeah, so there are different ways to test, but I think where the rubber meets the road is having access to actual customers and having the ability to measure through A/B testing methodologies what is the impact of what you ship. So, you know, we're going from a model where, let's say, we have several dozen running at the same time to several hundreds to several thousands. So that's the thing we're scaling. And this includes, you know, all these things I mentioned. First of all, making it, I hate to say required, but it is required to do where it makes sense. But then also scaling the infrastructure that makes it very easy and shows results, right? Our first instantiation of a product for A/B testing is a product with just phenomenal capabilities, but it wasn't the easiest thing to use. Now we're moving it towards more of a self-service model where you can design your products, you can design your audiences, you can launch a product given criteria, you can get the results analyzed for you and insights actually presented. So we're going more and more towards making it something that's fun and easy to use for anybody, not just a technical person.
Any further questions over here?
Before you embark on a project to test and experiments, where do the intuition come from usually in the company? Is that the brand manager? Is that the techies? Where do the intuition come from usually?
That's actually a very good question. So we welcome good ideas from any source, right? That being said. But typically, there are, I would say, 3 areas where we look for ideas. One is business health, operational excellence, right? If we have systems that are supposed to be 100% of the time available, but they keep crashing, sadly, that's actually most of the time the highest priority, right? So we essentially, to take that idea to the next level, we do continuous post-mortems on projects. We identify issues. And then you get 3 types of opportunities. One is the business health, the operational excellence. The second one are projects that either come from senior management or even from product owner level and sometimes even product specialists that are global projects, right? So there's a whole workflow for global projects that actually include several teams, several orgs. And then we also have local projects, which essentially means it can happen within, you know, one or a small number of teams. And the source of it comes through collaboration between product management and development. We expect the product manager doesn't need to invent what we do, but he needs to own it. He needs to understand it. He needs to build a business case around it. He needs to make it tangible. So through all these different sources on a regular basis, depending on parts of the org, quarterly or sometimes half a year, we gather all these ideas from these different sources, and there's more. Then we go through a prioritization period, and we publish, you know, very simple to use and simple to communicate, prioritize lists of what the company is going to work on throughout the next year and quarter.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions, unfortunately.
I want to add, I'm sorry, one last thing that's actually my favorite. Can't believe I forgot it. There is also obviously an interface we have with our research group. So our research group, they are, you know, your hardcore data scientist specialists. I almost want to say rocket scientists because they're awesome. I mean, we have some of the most amazing people you can have in the field. So there are always essentially applied research, and we also have a channel from that organization to take on some of the ideas that are at a place where we want to see if there's a potential for that to become a real product. That's also another source.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Give
you.
him a hand.